I want to talk about a few concepts. One is the word intention and why it's so important. I've been doing a lot of work on emotional distress, the intentional infliction of emotional distress, the tort. And I was reading or seeing a video recently where I saw Buddhism too, talking about the importance of intention. Okay, so let's follow that word. And I relate it to my work in terms of emotional abuse because I want society to understand how key it is to understand emotional abuse, not just as a specific element, yes, and in its repercussions through society. Because the point I'm getting at is that 90% of societal actions are determined below the surface. And we're spending 90% of our energy in the 10% above, the back and forth, yes and no, the fighting, when the real stuff is occurring below the surface. I actually wrote a memoir published about 6-7 years ago entitled Iceberg. And that was really more about my process in terms of coming to these understandings. That was long ago, but it might be worth looking at. It's more just in kind of the chrysalis stage, the coming into. But it talks about my process. But anyway, I was talking about the actions below the surface. And emotional abuse and emotional harm, it's about the 90% of energy that's occurring below the surface where people are being influenced. And the harm with emotional distress and this kind of, and I have submitted, innovative work in terms of the tort for the intentional infliction of emotional distress at the Massachusetts Appeals Court and all this kind of thing. But I want to talk for a moment about 3 layers of harm that occur with emotional distress and why it's so important. One is the harm itself. When you're injured, when someone mocks, ridicules, ostracizes, these things unto themselves are very, are harmful. Okay? We tend to minimize, but emotional abuse, emotional distress is an excruciating thing unto itself. Then it's exacerbated by the sense that, the person inflicting it is often seen as a winner. Okay? In society these days, we kind of extol when someone says, oh, they slammed somebody or they crushed them or, using these very loaded terms in terms of how we, how we describe events as if they're, we needed these huge winners and losers. And that gets to the third point is that as we mock, as we, raise up someone who slammed, we end up mocking the person who didn't win in that situation, who may be the honorable person in that situation. And as we continue to extol, naughty or harmful behavior, we then push down others, our very beings, those among us. And what we're not, so we're creating that third layer of harm. And what's happening as we create, wounded people, is society takes a toll on society itself, where society, we get a sense of decay, disease and decay with society because we're so fixated on winning and losing and winning not in the right way. I'll get to my coaching in a minute, but this all goes to, I want to interject this notion of intention because those who will intentionally inflict emotional harm, again, intention, inflict emotional harms, it's not understood that there are people who have this kind of parasitic sense or even sadistic sense of harming each other's. And this is where the drain on society takes place. They can be in high levels, academics, political, judges, medical, wherever they be, but there are people who are psychologically harmed themselves, psychologically impaired, and make a living or a business about kind of creating these patterns of behavior where they're leaning on others or extracting from others. The term emotional vampires. Their psychological energy is contrary to that sense of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When I say life, liberty, and the appropriate pursuit of happiness. But they are people who drain from others. And that's, again, where, I'm not challenging the ideal of success. I love it. That's where our coaching, Gentle Genius coaching comes in creating a better way, right? Because it's talking about creating success based on purpose, based on aligning with good and enduring ideals, and then developing the rigor and the endurance, the staying power to see your way through to these ideals. So one model, you've got a healthy company, family, or individual forging a purpose, having ideals, looking towards a vision. And then in another model, which is draining society, you have people who pull from and harm others and extol their victory, want to stand over people. They were even kick people when they're done. I mean, Jordan Peterson had a great concept about that third area when he called contempt. And he said, contempt is when we harm other people and then we, get to a stage where we say they were harmed because they deserved it. Most people don't deserve to be harmed at all. And that's a key understanding that I want to get to. Again, if we really want to make societal change, it's not about just standing on the surface 10% level and screaming at one another. It's understanding the real underpinnings and, taking a stand for your goodness, for your heart, for your courage, and really repudiating. We as a society, this is where our training, coaching, and mediation is leading the way, really repudiating that negativity and building companies, families, and individuals of character, integrity, and purpose. So what I'm bringing out is, that whole area of intention, that emotional abuse gets at people who do have an intention to harm, who don't have an intention to help as much, but there is an intention and a psychological impairment on their part where they're leaning on others. They're drawing from others. And this is what, something I want society to understand, because most of us are in that better area of intention. Most of us, we want to do well, or at least just go through our lives, not causing harm to others. And society's got to start rewarding, the goodness. That's why I talk about goodness as strength. We've got to bring out, develop, and reward goodness. Our society is at too critical a point to allow this kind of continual degradation, morally, emotionally, societally, of who we are. We've got to more so take a stand for what's right in our ideals. This is what all my life and work's about. It's what our coaching, training, and mediation is about. So take a look at the website and, really start to consider, please, that word intention. Okay? Who are the people with good intention? It's a Buddhist concept, that reinforced my thinking and said, all actions really relate to intention. People can make errors. People can, make harms and unintentionally. But what about those people who are intentionally creating harm? And I'm saying that a lot of that is invisible. We're not seeing it. And this is where society's got to get smarter psychologically. This is why I call Gentle Genius Coaching and our Diamond Transformation Psychology the premier coaching service on earth, because we're breaking ground in terms of this psychology. We're understanding that iceberg effect, and we're helping bring people up. So that the real winners, the real winning attitudes can be people who are acting on their goodness, pursuing their success, and helping society. www.theworldsgenius.com, restoringourhumanity.com, and worldsbestmediator.com.